Shattered reflections. The clay was supposed to be therapeutic, but Elena Vasquez's hands trembled as she shaped what was meant to be a simple bowl. 6 months had passed since Marcus Chung walked out of their shared apartment, taking his meticulously organized books and leaving behind only the faint scent of his expensive cologne and a hollow explanation that still echoed in her mind. I need someone more grounded. Elena, someone who understands practical priorities. At 28, Elena had built her reputation as one of Portland's most promising ceramics artists. Her studio apartment in the Pearl District overflowed with half-finished pieces, delicate vases that caught morning light, sculptural installations that local galleries coveted, and countless experiments in glazing techniques that pushed traditional boundaries. Marcus had once called her work pretty but impractical, a comment that should have been her first warning sign. The evening air carried the familiar sounds of the city as Elena cleaned clay from her fingernails, preparing for the opening reception at Meridian Contemporary. Her friend Sarah had insisted she attend, arguing that hiding in her studio would only feed her melancholy. Elena chose a simple black dress that complemented her dark hair and warm brown eyes, hoping to blend into the background while supporting. Her fellow artists dot the gallery, buzzed with conversation, wine glasses clinking against the backdrop of bold abstract paintings. Elena moved through the crowd, genuinely admiring the work while unconsciously scanning faces, a habit she developed since the breakup, always half expecting to encounter Marcus at Portland's intimate art scene gatherings. Elena, dare you? Sarah appeared at her elbow, radiant in an emerald green wrap dress. You have to see the ceramics installation in the back room. The artist used a technique similar to yours, but with these incredible metallic accents. They wandered toward the rear gallery, Sarah chattering about upcoming exhibitions and mutual friends. Elena nodded appropriately, but her attention drifted until Sarah's voice dropped to an excited whisper. Oh my God, did you hear about Marcus? He's engaged. The words hit Elena like cold water. She stopped walking, her wine glass suddenly heavy in her hand. What? To Jennifer Walsh, you know, that marketing executive he was always having work dinners with. Apparently, he proposed last weekend at some fancy restaurant downtown. It's all over social media. Alana's chest tightened. Jennifer Walsh, the blonde, perfectly polished woman Marcus had repeatedly dismissed as just a colleague during their relationship. The same woman who'd appeared in his Instagram stories with increasing frequency during their final months together, always with innocent explanations about client meetings and networking events. Elena, are you okay? Sarah's concern cut through the buzzing in her ears. I'm fine, Elena managed, though her voice sounded distant even to herself. I think I need some air. She stepped onto the gallery's small patio. Portland city lights, blurring slightly as unexpected tears gathered. Not tears of heartbreak. She'd shed those months ago, but tears of something more complex. Betrayal, perhaps, or simply the sting of being proven naive. Marcus had left her for being impractical, yet he'd been building a relationship with Jennifer while still sharing. Elena's bed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinelli at the International Ceramics Foundation. Elena, the Tuscany residency. Position is still available. Villa Artemisia would welcome you for the autumn session. Please consider your portfolio. Impressed everyone. Elena stared at the message, remembering the prestigious opportunity she'd declined weeks earlier too, heartbroken to imagine leaving Portland. Now, standing in the cool evening air with the truth about Marcus's deception settling around her like autumn leaves, the idea of Italy suddenly felt less like running away and more like running toward something. She typed her response quickly. Before doubt could creep in, I accept. When do I start? The reply came almost immediately. September 1st. Welcome to Villa Artemisia. For the first time in months, Elena smiled genuinely. Perhaps it was time to discover what lay beyond the shattered pieces of her old life. Renaissance Awakening. The cobblestone path leading to Villa Artemisia wound through olive groves that seemed to glow in the late afternoon sun. Elena pressed her face to the taxi window, watching cypress trees stand like ancient sentinels against the rolling Tuscan hills. After 18 hours of travel, her body ached, but her spirit felt lighter than it had in months. The villa itself took her breath away. Honey-colored stone walls climbed 3 stories, draped in ivy that had turned brilliant shades of amber and rust. Arched windows gazed out over terraced gardens where late-blooming roses perfumed the air. This was where she would spend the next 3 months, far from Portland's rain and the ghost of Marcus's presence in every familiar coffee shop. "You must be Elena Vasquez." A woman with silver-streaked hair and paint-stained fingers approached with a warm smile. "I'm Isabella Rossetti, the residency director. Welcome to our little paradise." Elena's studio turned out to be a converted stable with soaring ceilings and northern light that made her fingers itch to work. Her living quarters occupied a tower room with views that stretched to distant hills. As she unpacked her few belongings, she found a note on the antique writing desk. "The ceramics collection in the castle library might interest you. Ask Alessandro for access. I.R." The next morning, Elena explored the villa's main house, discovering other resident artists scattered throughout sun-drenched workspaces. A sculptor from Barcelona worked in marble dust-covered bliss, while a painter from Tokyo captured the changing light on massive canvases. The atmosphere hummed with creative energy and mutual respect for the artistic process. "Excuse me, Elena," asked Isabella over lunch in the communal dining room. "Who is Alessandro?" There was a note about a ceramics collection. Isabella's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Alessandro Romano. He owns Castello di Stel, about 10 minutes up the hill. Lovely man, deals in rare books and manuscripts, but he's passionate about historical ceramics. His family's collection spans 5 centuries. I mentioned your work to him, and he expressed interest in meeting you." That afternoon, Elena followed winding roads to an imposing medieval castle that rose from the hillside like something from a fairy tale. Massive stone walls enclosed courtyards where fountain water sparkled in dappled sunlight. She approached the heavy wooden doors feeling slightly intimidated. "You must be the ceramics artist Isabella mentioned." The voice was warm, cultured, with the faintest British accent threading through perfect English. Elena turned to find a man emerging from what appeared to be a garden maze, dirt on his hands and an apologetic smile on his face. "I'm Alessandro Romano. Forgive my appearance. I was battling with some stubborn rosebush." He was tall and lean, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples and intelligent hazel eyes that crinkled at the corners. His clothes were well made but comfortable, and he carried himself with the unconscious grace of someone completely at ease in his own skin. Elena guessed he was in his mid-30s, though there was something timeless about his presence. "Elena Vasquez, thank you for agreeing to show me your collection." Isabella said it's quite extensive. "Extensive is an understatement," Alessandro laughed, gesturing for her to follow him. "My family has been collecting for generations. Sometimes I think the ceramics chose us rather than the other way around." The castle's interior took Elena's breath away. Frescoed ceilings soared above rooms filled with carefully curated antiquities. But it was the library that made her gasp audibly. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with ancient volumes, and in specially designed alcoves, the most exquisite collection of historical ceramics she'd ever seen. 15th century Maiolica from Deruta, Alessandro said softly, watching her face as she approached a display case. "This piece depicts the story of Perseus and Andromeda. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Notice how the artist achieved such delicate shading with the cobalt blue." Elena leaned closer, her artist's eye drinking in details. The brushwork is incredible. You can see individual strokes in the hair rendering. This would have taken weeks to complete. Exactly. Alessandro's voice held genuine enthusiasm. Most people see only the finished beauty, but you understand the process behind it. That's rare. For the next 2 hours, they moved through the collection together. Alessandro proved to be a knowledgeable guide, sharing not just historical facts, but stories about how pieces had come into his family's possession. Elena found herself relaxing completely for the first time since arriving in Italy, engaged in the kind of deep conversation about art and technique that fed her soul. "Would you like to see the restoration workshop?" Alessandro asked as afternoon light began to slant through tall windows. "I have several pieces that could benefit from an expert opinion." Elena nodded eagerly. In a converted tower room, she found a space that rivaled any professional conservation lab, complete with specialized tools and materials for ceramic repair. "I restore pieces myself," Alessandro explained, somewhat shyly. "It started as necessity maintaining the family collection, but became a passion. There's something deeply satisfying about bringing damaged beauty back to life." Elena understood completely. As she examined a cracked Renaissance bowl awaiting repair, she felt something shift inside her chest, not the sharp pain of recent months, but a gentle unfurling of possibility. Canvas of Connection October arrived with crisp mornings and afternoons that still held summer's warmth. Elena had fallen into a rhythm that nourished both her art and her healing heart. Mornings in her villa studio produced her most ambitious work yet, pieces that merged traditional techniques with contemporary forms. Inspired by the historical ceramics she studied with Alessandro. Their friendship had deepened naturally over shared projects. What began as weekly visits to discuss restoration techniques had evolved into collaborative afternoons where Elena's modern expertise complemented Alessandro's historical knowledge. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing observations about glazing methods or firing temperatures that bridged centuries of ceramic tradition. "Your instincts about this piece were correct," Elena said, carefully applying conservation-grade adhesive to hairline cracks in a 16th century bowl. The original artist used a lead-based glaze that contracted differently than the clay body. That's why it developed these stress fractures. Alessandro looked up from the manuscript he was cataloging, pushing wire-rimmed reading glasses up his nose. "How do you know so much about historical methods?" "Most contemporary artists focus exclusively on modern techniques. My graduate advisor was obsessed with ceramic history," Elena replied, steadying the bowl with practiced hands. "She made us study everything from ancient Greek pottery to Islamic lusterware. I complained at the time, but now I'm grateful for the foundation." "And what would she think of your current work?" "The pieces you've been creating at the villa are extraordinary." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest, not the desperate validation she'd once sought from Marcus, but the quiet confidence that came from being truly seen. Alessandro had visited her studio several times, studying her latest sculptures with the same careful attention he gave Renaissance masterpieces. His appreciation felt different from gallery praise or academic criticism. It carried the weight of genuine understanding. "I think she'd be surprised," Elena admitted. "This is the most honest work I've ever made. Something about being here, having space to breathe and think. It's like I finally found my voice." Alessandro set down his manuscript and moved to stand beside her. "Perhaps you always had the voice. Perhaps you simply needed to be somewhere you could trust it would be heard." Their eyes met across the work table, and Elena felt her breath catch. Over the past weeks, she'd become aware of the way Alessandro's presence affected her, the anticipation she felt climbing the castle road, the reluctance to end their afternoons together, the way her heart lifted when she heard his footsteps in the library. But she'd been careful not to examine these feelings too closely, still tender from Marcus's betrayal. "Elena," Alessandro said quietly, "may I ask you something personal?" She nodded, though her pulse quickened. "Isabella mentioned you came to Italy after a difficult breakup. I hope our friendship hasn't been complicated by that experience. I would hate for you to feel pressured or uncomfortable." The careful consideration in his voice, the way he prioritized her emotional safety over his own desires, made Elena's chest tighten with recognition. This was how respect felt so different from Marcus's constant subtle criticisms and conditional affection. "Actually," she said, surprising herself with her honesty, "knowing you has shown me what I was missing before. Marcus, my ex, he saw my art as a hobby that interfered with more serious pursuits. He made me feel like I had to choose between creativity and being taken seriously." Alessandro's jaw tightened slightly. "That says far more about his limitations than yours. You really believe that, Elena?" Alessandro turned to face her fully, his hazel eyes serious. "In the past month, I've watched you approach damaged ceramics with the reverence of a conservator and the insight of a master craftsperson. I've seen you solve restoration puzzles that stumped experts. Your work in the Villa studio is museum quality, and your understanding of historical techniques rivals that of scholars who've studied nothing else their entire careers. Anyone who couldn't see your talent was simply not looking properly." The sincerity in his voice broke something open inside Elena, not the painful cracking of heartbreak, but the gentle opening of possibility. She realized that somewhere, in the past weeks, without conscious decision, she'd begun to trust again. "Alessandro," she said softly, "I think I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I look forward to seeing you every day. Not just because of the ceramics or the conversation, but because ... because being with you feels like coming home to myself." He was quiet for a long moment, and Elena wondered if she'd misread the situation entirely. Then he reached across the space between them, his fingers finding hers with gentle certainty. "I was hoping you might feel that way," he admitted. "These past weeks have been ... unexpected. I'd grown quite comfortable with solitude, convinced that meaningful connection was something that happened to other people. But then you arrived with your artist's eyes and your generous heart, and suddenly my castle felt less like a refuge and more like a place I wanted to share." Elena squeezed his hand, marveling at how right this felt, not the desperate intensity she'd mistaken for love with Marcus, but something steadier and more nourishing. "What happens now?" Alessandro smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Now, I think we see where this leads, if you're willing." Outside the workshop windows, golden afternoon light painted the Tuscan hills in shades of amber and rose. Elena looked at their joined hands, at Alessandro's kind face, at the centuries-old ceramics surrounding them, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with the present moment. "I'm willing," she whispered, and meant it with her whole heart. Masterpiece Proposal Spring arrived early in Tuscany, painting the countryside in brilliant greens and wildflower colors that seemed designed by nature's most optimistic artist. Elena had extended her residency twice, unable to bear the thought of leaving the life she'd built among the rolling hills. Her relationship with Alessandro had deepened with the changing seasons, growing from friendship to love with the patient grace of wine aging in ancient cellars. They had been inseparable for months now, sharing quiet mornings over espresso in the castle's sun-drenched breakfast room, collaborating on restoration projects that combined their expertise, and taking long walks through olive groves where Alessandro would point out wildflowers and share stories about his family's centuries-old connection to the land. Elena's art had transformed completely. Her latest series, ceramic sculptures that incorporated fragments of ancient pottery with contemporary forms, had caught the attention of galleries across Europe. But more importantly, she felt truly herself for the first time in years, confident in her voice both as an artist and as a woman worthy of genuine love. "I have something to show you," Alessandro said one April morning, peering in the doorway of her villa studio with an expression that managed to be both nervous and excited. Elena looked up from the piece she was glazing, a vessel that seemed to grow from the earth itself, its surface embedded with tiny shards of Roman pottery Alessandro had given her permission to use. "What kind of something?" "A kind that requires you to trust me completely and follow me without questions." She raised an eyebrow, but set down her brush, recognizing the playful mystery that had become one of Alessandro's most endearing traits. He'd surprised her before with picnics in hidden courtyards, midnight viewings of meteor showers from the castle's highest tower, and once, memorably, a private concert by a local string quartet in the library among the ceramics collection. They walked through the castle's maze of corridors, past familiar rooms filled with art and history, but Alessandro led her to a door she'd never noticed before, tucked behind a tapestry in the eastern wing. "My great-grandfather's private studio," Alessandro explained, producing an ornate key. "No one's used it in decades, but I thought, well, you'll see." The room beyond took Elena's breath away. Tall windows faced east, flooding the space with morning light. Ancient work tables lined the walls, their surfaces worn smooth by generations of hands. But what made her gasp was the pottery wheel in the center of the room, clearly centuries old but lovingly maintained, surrounded by tools and glazes that belonged in a museum. "Alessandro," she whispered, "this is incredible." "My great-grandfather was a ceramicist," he said, watching her explore with obvious pleasure. "Not professionally. The family business was always books and manuscripts, but he was passionate about the craft. This wheel came from Deruta in 1887. It hasn't been used since he died in 1963. Elena ran her fingers over the ancient wheel's surface, feeling the connection to generations of artists who had sat in this same spot, shaping clay with their hands and dreams. "Why are you showing me this?" Alessandro was quiet for a moment, and when she turned to look at him, she found him holding a small velvet box with an expression of such tender vulnerability that her heart stopped. "Because," he said softly, "I was hoping you might want to make this your permanent studio, if you'll have me, and this old castle, and a life we could build together." Elena's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a ring unlike any she'd ever seen. The center stone wasn't a diamond, but a piece of ancient Roman glass, deep blue-green like Mediterranean waters, set in a band of rose gold that looked handcrafted. The glass came from a Roman villa excavated on this property in 1923, Alessandro explained, his voice slightly shaky. "My great-grandfather had it set for my great-grandmother, but she died before he could propose. It's been waiting in the family vault ever since, and I thought perhaps it was waiting for you." Elena felt tears gather in her eyes, not the painful tears she'd shed over Marcus, but tears of pure joy and recognition. This proposal was so perfectly Alessandro, thoughtful, historically connected, and deeply personal rather than performative. "You want me to stay," she said, though it wasn't really a question. "I want you to stay, but more than that, I want you to choose this life because it makes you happy, not because you're running from something else. I want to wake up every morning knowing that the extraordinary woman who's taught me what partnership actually means has chosen to build a future with me." Elena looked around the studio at the ancient tools, the perfect light, the wheel where she could continue her work while being surrounded by centuries of artistic heritage. Then she looked at Alessandro, this gentle man who had shown her what it meant to be truly seen and valued. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." When Alessandro slipped the ring onto her finger, the ancient Roman glass caught the morning light and threw tiny rainbows across the studio walls. Elena thought of all the artists who had worked in this space before her, of the love stories that had played out within these stone walls, and felt herself becoming part of something larger and more beautiful than she'd ever imagined possible. When, she asked, already mentally composing the letter she'd need to write to officially end her Portland lease. Alessandro's smile was radiant. Whenever you're ready. We could have the ceremony here at the castle, in the courtyard garden. Small and intimate, with just the people who matter most. Elena kissed him then, tasting sunshine and possibility, surrounded by the tools of her craft and the promise of their shared future. Outside the studio windows, spring was painting Tuscany in shades of hope, and for the first time in her life, Elena felt completely, perfectly home. Portrait of Joy. The morning of her wedding dawned clear and golden, with the kind of light that seemed to bless everything it touched. Elena stood at her tower window, watching staff arrange white chairs in the castle's courtyard garden, while early summer roses perfumed the air. In 3 hours, she would marry Alessandro in the place that had become her sanctuary, surrounded by the people who had witnessed their love story unfold. Her dress hung nearby, not the elaborate gown she'd once imagined for herself, but a simple silk creation by a local designer who understood that elegance lay in clean lines and perfect fit rather than embellishment. The only jewelry she planned to wear was Alessandro's ring and a pair of ceramic earrings she'd made herself, glazed in the same blue-green as the Roman glass. Permesso? Isabella's voice came through the door, followed by the woman herself, carrying a tray of espresso and cornetti. I thought you might need fortification before the festivities begin. You're an angel, Elena said, accepting the coffee gratefully. I can't believe this is actually happening. You know, Isabella settled into the window seat beside her. In 20 years of running artist residencies, I've seen many transformations. People come here broken or searching, and they leave different, but I've never seen anyone bloom quite the way you have. Elena smiled, thinking of the woman who had arrived 8 months ago, hollow-eyed and unsure of her own worth. That person felt like a character from someone else's story now. I had no idea what I was running toward when I left Portland. Perhaps that's the point. Sometimes we have to leap before we can see where we'll land. By noon, the castle courtyard had transformed into something from a Renaissance painting. White roses and jasmine wound through ancient stone arches, while strings of tiny lights waited to illuminate the celebration that would continue into the evening. Alana's parents had flown in from California, their initial worry about their daughter marrying a man they'd never met dissolving the moment they saw her happiness. Alessandro's small circle of close friends mingled with the villa's resident artists, creating exactly the intimate gathering they'd envisioned. Elena walked down a path scattered with rose petals, her hand tucked into her father's arm, but her eyes fixed on Alessandro, waiting beside the fountain where they'd shared their first kiss months earlier. He wore a perfectly tailored suit the color of charcoal, but it was his expression that made her breath catch pure wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. The ceremony itself was brief and bilingual, conducted by Alessandro's childhood friend who had become a magistrate. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises that spoke of partnership and creative collaboration, of supporting each other's dreams while building new ones together. When Alessandro slipped a simple gold band beside her engagement ring, Elena felt the satisfying click of a life falling perfectly into place. You may kiss your wife, the magistrate announced with a grin, and Alessandro cupped Elena's face with hands that trembled slightly before their lips met. The small gathering erupted in cheers and applause, but Elena heard only the sound of her own heart. Finally at peace, the reception flowed naturally from aperitivos in the garden to dinner in the castle's great hall, where Isabella had somehow procured the most exquisite local delicacies. Elena found herself moving through the evening in a state of dreamy contentment, accepting congratulations while staying anchored to Alessandro's presence beside her god. It was during dessert that her phone, forgotten in her small clutch, buzzed with notifications. Elena ignored them initially, but when she finally checked during a quiet moment, she found dozens of messages and tags on social media. Somehow, photos of the ceremony had found their way online, probably through one of the other artists' Instagram. Stories and the images were spreading with the peculiar velocity of internet fascination. "Oh my God," her friend Maya had texted from Portland. "You look like an actual fairy tale princess. This is going viral, everyone's sharing it." Elena scrolled through the comments with bemused astonishment. Strangers were calling it wedding goals and analyzing every detail of her dress, the castle setting, the obvious joy radiating from the photographs. It felt surreal to see her private moment of happiness becoming public entertainment. "Everything all right?" Alessandro appeared at her elbow, concern creasing his features. Double quotes, just ... "This is strange. Our wedding is apparently trending on social media." He glanced at her phone screen and chuckled. "Well, you do make a rather stunning bride in a genuine castle. I suppose that's catnip for the internet." Among the flood of notifications, one name made Elena pause. Marcus. He'd sent a private message that simply read, "Saw the photos. You look happy. Congratulations." For a moment, Alana felt an echo of old pain, but it passed quickly, leaving only a distant recognition of the person she used to be. She showed the message to Alessandro, who raised an eyebrow. "Your ex-boyfriend?" Apparently he and his fiancée broke up last month, Elena said, having heard through mutual friends. Something about him being emotionally unavailable, and her realizing he was still hung up on someone else. Alessandro was quiet for a moment, then spoke with characteristic gentleness. "Do you feel vindicated?" Elena considered the question seriously. A year ago, she might have felt a surge of bitter satisfaction. Now, looking around at the life she'd built, the medieval castle where she would wake up tomorrow as Alessandro's wife, the studio where she'd continue creating her most authentic work, the man beside her who had never once made her question her worth, she felt only gratitude. "No," she said finally. "I feel free." As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Elena and Alessandro found themselves alone in the courtyard, where fairy lights now twinkled like earthbound stars. She kicked off her shoes and walked barefoot across stone that had witnessed countless celebrations over the centuries. "Any regrets?" Alessandro asked, pulling her close as they swayed to music only they could hear. Elena looked up at him. This unexpected love who had appeared when she'd finally stopped looking for external validation, and smiled. "Only that it took me so long to understand what I was worth." Above them, the ancient castle walls held their secrets, and Elena knew that someday, decades from now, her own love story would become part of the castle's history. The thought filled her with profound contentment. She had found not just love, but the truest version of herself. In the most beautiful place on earth. The viral wedding photos would be forgotten within days, replaced by the internet's next fascination. But this moment barefoot in her castle courtyard, dancing with the man who saw her completely, would last forever.